Okay, so we're going to talk about Thera now. Thera is one of the southernmost islands in the Cycladic Islands. So we looked at that on a map earlier when we were talking about the Cycladic art. And they kind of get lumped in with the Minoans a lot. They have very similar cultures. Okay, so Thera is a volcanic island, and the volcano there erupts in 1628 BC. And it's not just like a little eruption, it's like a massive eruption. Like it causes the seas to flood, it causes the sky to turn black from all the ash, it like blocks out the sun. It's a massive, super destructive eruption. But one of the other things that happens as a result of this, I mean, tons of people were killed. It was a horrific disaster, right? But also, a lot of the artworks and structures and things on Thera are preserved under the lava, under the resulting magma and eruptions and things. So, some of the artwork there is very, very well preserved. When I was in school, a lot of the stuff that has now been discovered on Thera had not yet been discovered. So they start kind of excavating it and discovering things there in 1967. And then some of the works, including this one that we're about to look at, are not unearthed and discovered until 2012. So relatively recently, just like a decade ago. Okay, so Akrotiri is a site on Thera where a lot of frescoes and artifacts and things are discovered, including this one, which is super interesting. Okay, so look at this fresco. Think about the other frescoes we've looked at, not just in this unit, but also when we were talking about Egypt. What do you notice about this one that sticks out immediately as being very different from any of the other frescoes we've seen so far? Think about it for a second. No people, right? Not only are there no people, there's no large animals. The only animals are these two little sparrows that are portrayed there. So this is a fresco that covered 3 separate walls, which is also kind of interesting. But it's not narrative, it's not didactic, meaning it's not teaching us anything, it's not recording anything, it's not a documentation like our Paleolithic parietal art of the different animal types in the area. It's not even really a realistic nature scene. We have what's called non-local color, so these kind of arbitrary primary colors of yellow, red, and blue. That's not what the land actually looked like. It's a little bit Dr. Seuss looking, kind of. So this is kind of an abstracted depiction of the natural world. And the striking, significant thing about it is there are no people and really no animals except a couple of birds. So it's very strange. So then what was the purpose of this? It's decorative, right? It's art for art's sake. So this is the first really clear example where we know that this is a purely decorative art for art's sake kind of undertaking, which is kind of a big deal, right? And it's slightly abstract. Like I said, it uses non-local color. It has these kind of weird sort of formations with this sort of arbitrarily just sort of chopped up application of color, which is really interesting. So this is kind of a big deal. This is a level of creative application of art skills that doesn't serve any other function that we haven't really seen much up until this point. Let's look at another example from Thera. Okay, so this is from the same site, Akrotiri in Thera, and this is the Crocus Gatherers. Crocuses are flowers, so we live in Missouri, so I always think of crocuses as being the things that tell you that spring is here. So they bloom pretty early in April. They're those little bitty, they almost look like little short tulips, kind of. They're those little bitty flowers, and they are yellow or purple or light purple or white. There might be some that are red, I'm not sure. They're usually purple, I think, are the most common colors of them around here in the Ozarks, but they come in those other colors as well. So sometimes they even poke up like through the snow, through the late snowfalls. You'll see crocuses. Look out for them in April and you'll see what I'm talking about. So crocuses are not just the harbingers of spring in the Ozarks and Missouri in the United States. They were an important source of a resource in the ancient world. Do you know what crocuses are good for? Are you aware of this? Not a ton of people usually are when I ask this in my seated classes. Does anyone like paella? No? Okay. Saffron. The little yellow spiky parts inside the crocus flowers are where we get the spice saffron. It's kind of a hard spice to describe if you've never had it. It's sort of like a umami, like savory, slightly sour kind of flavor. It's good. It's good to cook with. It's very expensive because it has to be hand gathered from these little flowers. So people have known about saffron for a very long time, as evidenced in this fresco. Saffron has lots of uses beyond just being a yummy spice, used particularly in Portuguese and Spanish cooking. It makes this very like golden kind of yellow, almost orange glowy kind of dye, which was used as a pigment in the ancient world and also used to dye clothing. It also is a mild painkiller, particularly in some writings from ancient historians. We know that it was used to treat menstrual cramps. So the thought is that this mural, this fresco of the Crocus Gatherers that depicts two young women gathering them, that maybe this was a kind of rite of passage, like you went out and you gathered the crocus to make medicine with, to season food with, to dye clothing with. So we have these two young women out gathering saffron, gathering crocuses. Other interesting things about this is we can see a lot about what these women are wearing, and it's fairly similar to what women portrayed in frescoes at Knossos and on Crete in general are wearing. So it's these cultures were obviously very closely related to one another. And they're in fairly close proximity to each other and are both kind of seafaring people, so it makes sense. Another thing is we still have this strange version of the landscape that has this sort of arbitrary primary color palette, this non-local color of yellow, red, and blue, which is very interesting. There are a lot of different ideas about what that might mean. Okay, so that is just a couple of frescoes from Thera that I want to show you. And Thera is kind of funny because it's the depictions are so closely related to what we see from the Minoans that they sort of get grouped in with them, but they're really one of the Cycladic islands. So that's why we're just going to talk about Thera by itself. And they are still excavating here. They're still discovering new things. So it's a very interesting active site. Okay.